going to talk about fomentations. Now they can be contrast fomentations, which means that we end with the cold after applying that heat. The other type of fomentation is just the hot fomentation, which is just putting heat to the body to relax muscle spasms. Now back in the 1930s, there was a young nurse, her name was Sister Kenny. And during that time, the polio was running rampant. People were getting fevers, they were getting these stiff joints, and people didn't know what to do. There was no cure for this. But what Sister Kenny did was take hot fomentations and wrap them around the limbs, especially of children who had this fever, and their limbs would get very stiff. So she would wrap them, their arms, their legs, their back, with these hot fomentations. And then she followed up with some passive exercises once the fever was gone. And these children recovered, totally recovered, without any side effects or crippling afterwards. Now in the allopathic world, the only thing that they knew as far as treating polio was to brace these limbs that were so stiff. So later on in life, you would see these people who had polio on crutches or just walking like this. And I remember an instructor that we had in high school, great guy, and he had had polio as a kid, and he was walking with these stiff limbs down the hall. He could hardly walk, but he was still doing it. But with the Sister Kenny treatment of the hot fomentations, kids would recover completely, which is a wonderful thing with hot fomentations. Another thing was back in the 1918, way back even before the 1930s, in 1918 there was a Spanish flu that went around. Well, this flu ended up killing about 20 to 50 million people worldwide. So it was a totally pandemic flu. Now what happens if today we end up with the flu that starts killing people worldwide? We already know that we're running out of certain antibiotics for things like MRSA and VRSA. We also have drug-resistant tuberculosis. Nothing is there to help now with some forms of tuberculosis. So I believe that by learning lots of hydrotherapy and teaching it everywhere we go, we can help people in these situations. So back in 1918, when the Spanish flu hit, I remember reading an article from back then that at the Battle Creek Sanitarium, where they did fomentations, the people would actually recover from the flu. This flu was very fast. If you were sick in the morning, you could be dead by the evening. So if people were still able to walk into the sanitarium, they were usually always cured. If they were already on a litter being drug in, a lot of times that was too late. But as I researched, I found that it was the hot fomentation that helped to heal these people and keep them alive. So this was a very critical thing where hydrotherapy was very, very helpful. And we never know in the future when we're going to need this. Now the hot fomentation can be done simply at home or almost anywhere you go where there is a microwave. Now I like to take a towel, just wring it out or put it in the spin cycle of your wash, and then put it in the microwave just in a plain old plastic bag. I'll usually just twirl it. It'll seal the bag and it'll create a steam inside to heat it. Now the old fomentation pads were made out of thick cotton. Sometimes they put wool in between, but we don't need all that fancy stuff. We just need a good hot fomentation, which is just a cotton towel that we can put in the microwave, heat up, and then use on the client. Now remember, when we do it as a contrast, we're going to add the cold mitten friction with it, which means we have ice water with either a cold mitt in it or even just a washcloth that we can take and just briskly rub on the client to create that reaction. Now let's continue with the fomentations. And as we discussed earlier, the contrast fomentations is when we go from hot to cold. If you're not using any cold, it's just called a fomentation. Now some of the benefits, we've already talked about muscle spasms. This is very helpful for muscle spasms, whether it's for an athlete or whether it's for someone with polio or any type of other spasms. It is helpful for people who have sciatica. Also, for people who want to increase their immune systems, such as if they have bronchitis or a flu. This is one of the most helpful benefits for the flu or chest congestion. Now, some contraindications are cancer, any type of malignancy from cancer. This is not the treatment of choice for cancer. There are other treatments that can be used. Also, we want to be careful with diabetics. Remember, their feet may not have feelings, so anything with the heat, we want to be very cautious when we're dealing with a diabetic health guest. Another contraindication is if anybody's having bleeding, because these can be applied to either the chest, to the abdomen, or any place where there's a spasm. Now, if they're having any type of bleeding or hemorrhaging, we're going to be careful not to apply it to that area, as well as any limb that might be paralyzed. I'd like to tell you a story of something that I experienced early on when I was learning about hydrotherapy. I had contracted bronchitis somehow, and I was coughing and had lots of chest congestion. And one of the gals that was working in the office said, "Hey, let me give you a hot fomentation." And I was like, well, I don't know. I know when you do the full treatment, it's a lot of work, and it's beyond those 20 minutes. So she said, no worries, I'll get it ready. You come on down, and we'll do it. So I said, okay. And I was feeling really bad at the time, and I thought, I'll try anything. So while she's giving me this hot fomentation, I'm laying with these hot packs on my back, on my chest, and my feet are in hot water. She covered me with a sheet to keep the steam in, and then with the blanket to make sure that I stayed warm. So during this treatment, after about 5 minutes, she would sit me up, ice me down with the cold mitten friction, and then lay me back down. And at the very end, she poured cold water over my feet to end the treatment. Well, during that time, I was kind of trapped with these in between these hot fomentations, so I couldn't go anywhere. So guess what? She told me the story of her life, and she told me how she came to know God. And it was an amazing story. And she even prayed with me. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. Now you have time with your health guests, time that you can spend with them to share your story, because everybody has a testimony. And it's also a wonderful time to be able to pray with your client when you have them there kind of stuck between the fomentations. Now, you don't want to overdo it. Just tell them your story and keep it simple. I will never forget this hot fomentation that I experienced. After the treatment, I believe she actually did a little percussions on my back to where I was able to cough up a lot of those secretions that had been building up in my lungs. And I did recover much faster than I normally would have. So I was very thankful for this treatment. So try the fomentation. The fomentation is actually, if you do the Cadillac of treatments, you're actually putting their feet in hot water the same time you have hot compresses or hot fomentations on their chest and on their back. So it's quite an amazing treatment, and it has helped many people. Think of all the people in the 1918 flu that it helped. And remember when there was polio in the 1930s. Let's move on to our demonstration. Thank you for joining us today with the Fomentations. We are going to do a demonstration now of the Fomentations. And today with us we have Denny. Denny actually lives on this beautiful island, and she has a history of all types of back pain. She's even broken her back already. She's had ruptured discs, so she's had back pain for a long, long time. At least 10 plus years she's had back pain, and especially in her lower back. So this is where we're going to do the fomentation now. So we are going to begin with the hot fomentation. And if you look, there's actually steam that is coming from this. This is very hot, and I will explain to you in a moment. How does that feel, Denny? And Denny, you need to let me know if it gets too hot. And we want to make sure that it's dry before we put the fomentation on. So this is the first fomentation we're going to be putting on our back. We're going to do 3 altogether. Since it's a contrast fomentation, remember contrast meaning hot and cold. We're going to do the cold in between. And we're going to look for the reaction. Remember how we said it's important to note the reaction. When it's first on, the site is going to be probably red and kind of a deeper red. As we do the cold, it becomes a brighter red. Then we know we're getting a good reaction. Now, if we're not getting any reaction at all and it's kind of a pale or just pink, we know that she's not been getting circulation in that area for a long, long time. And we need to remember to constantly be checking in with your client to make sure it's not getting too hot. How are you doing, Denny? And I'm going to just put my hand underneath here, and as I rub, I'm going to just feel for any moisture and pull out the moisture, because it's the moisture that can cause the heat. So if you've noticed, I have a towel in between the fomentation and the client or the health guest, and then I put another on top, either a layer the same, or I can take another cloth and just put it on so that she gets that good, nice heat close to her body. Now, how we did this is we took this nice big hand towel and we wet it. Then we wrung it out. Actually, somebody else did this for me, and they did a great job. So they wrung it out very nicely so it's not dripping wet. It's just a nice damp cloth. Then he actually took it, rolled it up, and put it in a plastic bag. Now, these aren't easy to find in Hawaii, but we did find a plastic garbage bag. I love it because they're so cautious about the environment here. So all you do, you take this damp cloth, you put it in the plastic bag, you take it and you close it and kind of seal it just by turning it. See, that kind of seals it, and then I'll put it upside down so that it stays closed in the microwave, and we microwave this anywhere from 3 to 4 minutes depending on your microwave. And we want it to be nice and hot. Sometimes you can use gloves. Somewhere here I have gloves. You can use these gloves or a thicker rubber pair of gloves to pull this out when it's hot. So we want to be very careful because it may be steaming. You don't want to get burnt. So you open it carefully. If you need the gloves, put the gloves on. Otherwise, you can dip your fingers in the ice cold water. And here again, we have the sock with ice in it, and that's what I'm going to use to do the cold mitten friction. I like this because it doesn't get all over the place. You're not slopping water all over, and it's easy to do, and you can keep using it over and over again through the whole treatment because there's enough ice in here that it's not going to melt through one treatment. So that's a good thing. So now, when we've left this on here maybe 3 to 5 minutes, we are going to change it. So I'm going to pull this off. I'm going to take it, and I'm just going to place it on the floor there. And let's take a look at the color. We can see a little bit of color in her back. And you can see it's kind of a deeper red, which is good. So she's getting some color. Then as I do the cold, you'll notice that it gets even a brighter red. And now to continue with the hot fomentations. We have just removed the first one. We've iced it down. It's nice and dry because we've dried it off as well, because the moisture will create heat and may cause a burn. So we want to be very careful. We see that she's getting a little bit of color in here. So we want to quickly keep that heat in there by covering it up with another, this is like a double layer of towel. I'm going to be very careful as I take this out of here so that I don't get burnt. And I'm going to hold it from the edges. This is very hot. So I will just fold it, and I'm going to lay that right on there to heat up again, and I will cover it up with that part of the towel. And I can always lay something on there to make it a little heavier and make it a little bit warmer. And again, we want to be careful to always check in with the client. How is this, Denny? Oh, she said it feels wonderful. So it's nice and hot under there, because I know it was very, very hot on my fingers. And remember, in order not to burn your fingers, you can ice them a little bit first before you take out the hot towel. And even afterwards, it feels really good, because wow, that was hot. But we want it to be as hot as it can be, and we want the cold to be as cold as it can be. Remember, that's how we get our best reaction. So I'm going to put my hand underneath here just to feel for any moisture and to take it away. Because you know, on your back you have that little dip. So sometimes just the heat will cause a little bit of swelling, or the moisture will just hang in that dip. So I just want to swipe it away, make sure I don't have anything in that dip. If I don't want to use just my hand, I can also use a washcloth to go under there and take that moisture out. So now that this has been on here for, we'll say 2 to 3 minutes, we are going to do the ice again. And again, we want to watch the reaction. I'm going to keep this towel here to dry. I'm going to pull this back, and I'm going to check the color of her skin, which it is a nice deeper red. I'm going to put that towel there, and then I'm going to nice cold mitten friction. How does that feel? I haven't heard her scream with the cold, which is good. So as we can see, it's turning a little bit browner, a little bit brighter red in certain areas, but not the whole area. Now I'm going to dry this off before I apply another hot towel. Can you just hand that to me, please? So I'm going to try that. I'm going to dry it very good, and I'm looking for that. And you can tell she's not had a lot of circulation in that area. So I'm going to do this again. So just cover it up, make sure it's not too moist. And I'm going to be careful, roll this bag down so that I'm not going to burn myself. And I'm going to take this and lay it on there. How's that feel, Denny? Yeah, she tolerates the cold very nicely. And we'll place that on there to make it just a little bit warmer and nice and close to the skin. Now remember, we always start with the hot and we end with the cold. That's correct. We end with the cold. That is so very important to remember. This is an easy treatment to finish up, because all we're going to do is the cold, we're going to dry, and then we're done with the treatment. Now this can be done a couple times a day. Since I'm not getting a huge reaction from her, which I would suspect because she's had back pain for over 10 years now. But as we get more and more circulation into that area, it's the blood that's going to help to heal. Remember, we do none of the healing, but by praying to our Creator, He can help bless these treatments. He can also give us wisdom to learn which treatment to use for which disease process or ailment that's going on. Just like I mentioned before, the gal that had the seizure disorders, I wasn't sure what to do. So I sent a prayer up to heaven, and I'm like, Lord, what can I do? So I thought of, hey, how about the wet sheet pack? And the wet sheet pack is something that did help her. So I give all the glory to God because it's His simple remedies that do this. It's Him that does the healing. And as we get the fresh new blood in there, it's going to be wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off now and ice the area. And she is getting a little bit of a reaction. But probably if I do this tomorrow, she'll get even better a reaction. So I hope you have learned some things on this and that you will be able to share it with other people to help them. We thank you for watching us today. Be healthy.